How do you ever, say, bought something on a total whim? Or maybe stuck with a really bad decision just because you'd already put so much time into it? Yeah, we've all been there. See, we love to think that we're in the driver's seat, making these super logical, well thought out choices. But what if I told you that most of the time, we're not? Okay, let's dive into the hidden forces that are really pulling the strings.
So for a long, long time, the world of economics was built on this one big idea: the perfectly rational human. You know the type, someone who carefully weighs every single pro and con and always makes the best possible choice. It's a really neat theory for sure, but it has one teeny tiny problem. It doesn't describe how real people, like you and me, actually behave in the real world.
So think of it like this. On one side, you've got the rational agent. This is like a supercomputer, all logic, all calculation. And then on the other side, well, that's us, the human consumer. We're messy, we're impulsive, we're swayed by our moods, what our friends think, and just gut feelings. And behavioral economics, that's the cool part. It doesn't see this as some kind of flaw. Nope, it sees it as the reality we have to work with.
And here's a number that just completely blows that old myth right out of the water. Research suggests that a staggering 95% of our decisions are not made with careful, conscious thought. They're bubbling up from our subconscious, from our biases, our emotions. Think about that for a second. The vast majority of the time, our choices are happening on autopilot.
This brings us to a really core idea from the behavioral economist Dan Ariely. He points out that our mistakes are totally irrational choices. They're not just random chaos, not at all. They actually follow very specific, repeatable patterns. We are, as he so brilliantly puts it, predictably irrational. And once you start to see these patterns, you can start to understand them, not just in other people, but, and this is the important part, in yourself.
So, how does this predictable irrationality actually work? Well, it's all thanks to something called cognitive biases. Now, these are basically the mental shortcuts our brains use to make sense of a really complex world, and to do it fast. They're usually super helpful, but they can also lead us into making some pretty consistent and sometimes pretty silly errors in judgment.
Let's look at a couple of big ones you've definitely encountered. First up, the anchoring bias. You know when you see a sweater with a ridiculously high price tag, and then right next to it, the sale price? That first price becomes an anchor in your mind, making the sale price look like an amazing deal, even if it's still expensive. Then there's loss aversion. The pain of losing $20 feels way more intense than the pleasure of finding $20. It's why Amazon's lightning deals are so effective. They tap right into that deep-seated fear of missing out.
And here are two more classics. Ever sat through an absolutely terrible movie just because you paid for the ticket? Yep, that's the sunk cost fallacy. You're letting a past investment, that sunk cost, drive your present decision, even though it makes no sense. And then we have present bias. This is the one that explains why we so often choose a small immediate reward, like hitting snooze, over a much bigger future payoff, like being on time. Our brains are just hardwired to value right now way more than later.
But it's not just about these clever little mental shortcuts. Sometimes our rational brain doesn't just get led astray. It gets completely hijacked by a much more primal force, raw emotion. Let's take a look at how this plays out in a situation that is probably all too familiar.
Okay, so picture this. An author, he gets into a heated argument with his wife. He's upset, he's angry, he's totally distracted. And in this state, he goes outside and accidentally locks his keys in the car. His immediate, panicked reaction is to find a long ruler to try and jimmy the lock open. He spends ages completely fixated on this one solution, all while completely forgetting that the spare car key has been right there, in his pocket, the entire time. That story just perfectly demonstrates a fundamental principle of our brains. When our emotions are running high, whether it's anger, fear, even intense joy, our ability to think clearly and rationally just plummets. His anger and frustration created this kind of tunnel vision, and it made the simple, obvious solution completely invisible to him. And there's a scientific name for this exact thing. It's called the amygdala hijack. See, your amygdala is the emotional command center of your brain. When it senses a threat, it can literally shortcut the signal, completely bypassing your logical, thinking brain, the neocortex. What you get is that classic fight or flight response. Now, that's fantastic if you're, say, face-to-face with a tiger. Not so great when you're just facing a locked car door or a frustrating email from your boss. Okay, so we've established that we're all driven by these hidden biases and emotional hijacks. Great. So, what can we actually do about it? Well, let's look at our first practical tool, and it starts with a word you might find a little surprising. This quote from the legendary negotiation expert Jim Camp, it just flips everything we think we know on its head. We're all taught to push for yes, right? To see yes as the ultimate goal. But what Camp argues is that starting with yes is actually a trap. It creates pressure, it creates fear, and it often leads to a commitment that isn't real at all.
And this really gets to the heart of it. Let's compare a forced yes with an honest no. When you pressure someone into saying yes, it rarely leads to genuine buy-in. But when you give someone permission to say no, it's like a weight is lifted. It makes them feel safe, it makes them feel in control, and that, right there, is when a real, honest conversation can finally start.
So inviting a no is incredibly powerful because it lowers that emotional temperature we were just talking about. It gives the other person a sense of control, and that builds trust and encourages them to actually tell you what they're thinking. A no isn't the end of the conversation. In fact, it's often the real beginning.
So that's a great tool for conversations. But what about all the little choices we make every single day? Well, our second tool isn't about trying to change people's minds. It's about changing the environment where they make their decisions. And this is the art of the nudge.
A nudge, which is a concept made famous by Richard Thaler, is basically a gentle push in a better direction. It's not about banning junk food, okay? It's about putting the fruit and healthy snacks at eye level in the cafeteria. It doesn't force you to do anything, but it makes the better choice the easier, more obvious choice.
And this isn't just some random idea. There's actually a clear, step-by-step process for designing these effective nudges. You start by defining what you want to achieve, like, say, getting more employees to sign up for their retirement plan. Then you figure out what's getting in the way. Is the form too long? Is it confusing? You remove that friction. Then you can brainstorm some gentle nudges, like making enrollment automatic unless someone actively opts out. And then you test it and see what happens. It's a systematic way to design for how people actually behave, not how we think they should behave.
So, from the sneaky mental shortcuts of cognitive bias to the overwhelming power of an amygdala hijacked, these hidden forces are constantly at play. They're not flaws, really. They're just part of the human operating system. But by understanding them, you gain this incredible power to actually notice them in action. So the real question is, the next time you make a choice, which one of these hidden forces will you spot first?